Notorious B.I.G. It's Global 2.7. Mo money, mo problems. The relationship between money and sociological problems is tight.
Who's hot? Who not? Tell me who rock? Who sell out in the stores? You tell me who flop? Who cop the blue drop?
You got a little Notorious B.I.G. with Puff Daddy. That was like the original song that featured Puff Daddy. And we are talking about River Valley civilizations. I got no kids in school today. I just got my flannel, my hat on, just chill. Right? It's going to be great. We'll keep it nice and easy for you. We are still sort of like in the third piece of discovering about Mesopotamia. We've covered this ancient Sumerian culture of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians, the ancient city of Ur. We're going to wrap that all up in this sort of Mesopotamia area of the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, the cradle of civilization. And we have talked about the history of the ancient Sumerians and the geography of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley and the silt during the flood season that sort of gets deposited. We've talked about the economics of having tokens that would lead to having more kids. We don't need to get into the details there a whole lot, but you can imagine. We've talked about the culture really being centered around food. And today, we're going to develop some thoughts about the sociology and psychology of this ancient river civilization. When we talk sociology, this might be the first time. I don't know whether Mr. Snyder covered this or not when you had him in middle school, or whoever you had in middle school. But when we talk about sociology, here is an important concept to understand. This is the social pyramid. And this is not the last time that you're going to be hearing about this. I know that. I particularly will cover the social pyramid over and over and over again. I know Ms. Sainheim's going to hit you with social pyramid stuff. And then when you have me again, hopefully in MOAS as a 12th grader, we're going to talk social pyramid again and again and again. This is a concept you absolutely have to understand coming out of high school. And the social pyramid works like this, right? The higher you are on the pyramid, the more power and wealth you might have. Now remember, wealth in the sense of ancient Sumeria, when we're talking about wealth, we're talking about food control, right? Controlling the food. If you had a lot of food, you had more tokens. If you had more tokens, you had more kids. If you had more kids, you had more workers. If you had more workers, you had more food. And it was like this beautiful upward cycle. I say beautiful sort of sarcastically, right? And so that led to more power and wealth. It was really about having a lot of land, being able to farm that land, and being able to be wealthy because you could feed yourself and others. And if you didn't have a lot of food, then you were like sort of what we'd consider traditionally poor. Okay? The width of the pyramid, so down here at the bottom, this is the number of people at each particular level. So at the bottom of the pyramid, the people that had the least power and least wealth, there's going to be more of them. Okay, and we're going to stratify this pyramid out. I'm not going to draw it exactly to scale, but the pyramid's going to be sort of drawn out like this. We're going to just stick to like a nice simple 4-level pyramid. The most power and the most wealth was at the top with the king. Okay, and what made the king king is that he controlled the food supply, right? It was really that easy. He had the most land, the most sort of like children to control that land and to protect that land, the most workers and children in order to develop that land and get food from that land. And by controlling the food supply, it really puts you in charge. I mean, just think about that. When you're home, I do this with my own kids. I'll be like, if you don't vacuum the house, you're not getting dessert tonight. And you won't believe how fast that house gets vacuumed, right? If I threaten them with taking away some food that they really like, in our culture, it's like ice cream. I would never threaten my kids with, you're not going to eat tonight. But imagine if I did, I bet the house would get vacuumed. It sure would, right? So the king controlled the food supply. And underneath the king, you had nobles, which were either friends of the king or relatives of the king, and that would make sense. And underneath the nobles, you had these commoners, Maybe they did some other jobs like merchants or artisans. Maybe they made stuff. Maybe they were trading things. Maybe they worked in the temple. Remember the temple? Okay. You had temple workers and artisans. Maybe they fished. This isn't a huge fishing culture, but just an alternative type of activity. So you had kings, noblemen, commoners, and then of course down at the bottom, slaves. And of course, slaves were put to work in order to generate food supply for everybody else. And slaves would be given maybe just enough food, sort of a subsistence living, given just enough food to keep themselves alive and working and healthy, right? But they didn't have excess food to exchange for tokens. Therefore, they could not generate larger families, which would then allow them to control more land. And so they're sort of kept at the bottom on purpose, right? And we call that sort of oppression. They were oppressed on purpose, right? They were like sort of pushed down, and the society was rigged, so you couldn't really get out of slavery because you didn't have the ability to have excess amounts of food, which would then allow you to become more mobile and climb the ladder and control more land and control more food and control more people. So this was the basic society that we see in Sumeria and these other Mesopotamian river civilizations. And this is a social pyramid. That's the term that we want to understand. And because this is your first exposure to it, it's most important to understand the power and wealth higher as you go up on the pyramid, number of people smaller as you go up on the pyramid, unless, of course, we were to flip the pyramid. But that's a story from much later period in time, like maybe when you get to late 10th grade. Let's talk about the psychology over here. How does the human brain sort of diagnose this social pyramid? There's a little psychosocial issue going on here. There are some natural tendencies in a psychological sense in the way that we compartmentalize and view these people, right? So for instance, when we talk about the psychology of a king, right, these people up here, the sort of psychosocial condition, the king could often be seen as greedy, right? Psychologically, the rest of the pyramid might view the king as greedy. Not saying the king necessarily is greedy, but he may be viewed that way. The king might be viewed as elitist or snobby. Conversely, down here at the bottom, the sort of poor commoners and slaves, and lower level commoners and slaves, they might be viewed sort of more, psychologically, they might be viewed as poor and dirty, literally unclean. Okay? And you're going to have a certain amount of jealousy. Right? Even a nobleman, this is a sort of an interesting idea, right? Even a nobleman that might be like here, very high in the pyramid, as long as there's someone above you, you might have some levels of jealousy. So psychologically, there is going to be a lot of jealousy towards the top of the pyramid. Right? The commoners are going to be jealous of the nobles are going to be jealous of the king, the slaves are going to be jealous of everybody, and this is a very jealousy-ridden society. Psychologically, that's what happens when you have this type of a social pyramid. Conversely, right, these people up here, they may view the bottom of the pyramid, right? They're not going to be necessarily jealous of them, but they might view them as sort of like despicable wastes. Right? Like, I don't need to spend any time with those people. All right? And that's the sort of the psychology that's developed in this Mesopotamian culture. Ancient river civilization. We've now covered the history, the geography, the anthropology, the economics, where now we understand the sociology maybe of what was going on in that type of a culture at this time period, and the psychology, real basic psychological thoughts and emotions start to develop because of the way the society is built. And we cannot underestimate the idea that jealousy is going to be key here. And if there's going to be jealousy, right? There's always going to be sort of like that threat of revolution. And I would like to just end on that note with a red marker here. Revolution is a very misunderstood idea, probably because we as Americans always think of the American Revolution. We get this fantasy in our head that the American Revolution was somehow when these poor people living in the colonies overthrew the King of England and we freed ourselves from the King of England. We have to remember, those revolutionary people in the original 13 colonies, which would become the United States, they were not poor. They were not poor farmers. George Washington was not a poor farmer. Thomas Jefferson was not a poor farmer. These people were noblemen, right, in a way. Thomas Jefferson was extremely well educated. They had money. They had these huge plantations, right? They owned slaves, many of them. The Revolution, kids, this is just so I'll end on this note. The revolution usually comes from here. This is the hot spot for revolution. When that upper part of the pyramid starts to get sick of their situation, they have the money, they have the power. In this particular case, not so much money, but they had the land and the supply of food available to them where they could literally maybe overthrow a king if they became unhappy. Slaves, low-level commoners, these people are not powerful enough and do not control enough wealth and do not have enough power to really create a revolutionary moment. The revolution comes from up higher on the pyramid. Just want to talk about that psychologically also, right? So psychologically, the revolution comes from high on the pyramid. I'll just double check as I say goodbye, make sure that that fits on the screen there. It sure does. And I will see you guys tomorrow.